The Orange County Forum is a nonprofit organization. Your contributions are tax deductible.
Okay, thank you all for being here. We're going to get started. Thank you very much. Thank you for joining the Orange County Forum for our cybersecurity program with UCI's Bryan Cunningham, Southern California Edison's David Coher. I hope I pronounced your name right, Mr. Coher.
Thank you.
The FBI's SSA, David Willett, and our moderator, Richard Franzi. I'd like to recognize today's promotional partner, the FBI Los Angeles Citizens Academy Alumni Association, as well as thank our sponsors for generous and consistent support of our programs. A complete list of the sponsors can be found on the programs at your table and on the screen.
Thank you, Owen. Why don't I invite the panelists to come up and grab a chair, and I'll introduce them if you would like me to introduce them as well. It's great to be here. Enjoy your lunch, chew and listen at the same time. Just please understand that there's ample time in the agenda for you to ask these three very intelligent folks questions. So start formulating your question. I'm sure if you don't know the answer or you're curious about it, there are others in this room that are curious as well. So be the brave member and proudly raise your hand and ask your questions. Now, David, maybe we'll start with you. What, in your opinion, are three questions that a business leader should ask his or her organization as it relates to cybersecurity, cyber policy?
So I think the first question is to sort out who in the organization is responsible for assessing your cyber risks and making sure that person knows that they are responsible for that. A lot of times organizations will tend to reflexively look to IT, thinking, well, that's the computer guy or gal, they're the ones that are in charge of the computers, obviously they handle those risks as well. And that's not necessarily the best answer. Your IT department has a number of priorities, and prioritizing security may or may not be at the top of their list. There's also budgetary considerations, other resource constraints in terms of technology to actually implement the business and move processes forward, which means that security may be seen as an additional burden on resources or as an impediment to implementing technology solutions otherwise. And so security could get moved to the back of the line if you necessarily just relegate it to your IT department. Rather, it's important to have somebody who has separate reporting responsibilities who has that authority. This doesn't necessarily mean building out a whole separate department. I'm not necessarily saying that we need to incur those kinds of costs, but we do need to have someone who has an eye towards security and can be asking those questions of your own IT. Once you've figured out who it is that has this responsibility, then the question becomes for them to sit down and start going through what is the work of your company, all of the various departments, and what are the cyber risks involved. As I said earlier, it's not just a matter of saying that, okay, I have our email system locked down, we're protected there, we have a timekeeping system or whatever is critical to your business that we've added passwords for all those systems. So now we're good, we're locked down. It's above and beyond that. Bryan talked a little bit about this, the idea of this cyber physical realm, which has been something that's been of concern primarily in the industrial space because of the idea of having internet-controlled machines that are performing physical tasks, whether it's in manufacturing, power generation, or the like. Now we're seeing with the Internet of Things all kinds of physical devices being integrated throughout our lives. Great example, Fitbits and Apple Watches, things of that nature, which are really just monitoring physical activity happening otherwise. As you're getting into internet-connected cars, for example, you have the ability to take over your car, you have the ability to be controlling it. In many ways, this can be convenient. For example, you can have certain models of cars drive to you through the parking lot, but that also means that can be controlled by somebody else. Coming back to what you should be asking for your business, you need to be thinking about what are those other risks that are integrated into the work that we do otherwise, and what do we need to be preventing, or more appropriately planning for. And then finally, I'll say it's about asking how do we know that that's the extent of those risks. That means asking the deeper questions about what is, not just taking the initial answer. So you may go to a certain part of the company, let's say sales, for example, where it may seem like that area doesn't have much to do with cyber risks, given the nature of business development in your industry. But really, having your person who's in charge of security understand that part of the business, so as to ask deeper questions about, well, wait a minute, what about this or that process that may have some impact, or may be impacted, I should say, by a system that can be hacked. And when you ask those deeper questions, that's where you can start to really have a good risk profile. This doesn't mean that you then need to build walls around everything. It's more a matter of understanding where your risks lie. And once you have that strong understanding, then you can plan accordingly.
Can I just add two things to that
Please.
quickly? I always like to leave people with some practical takeaways, and I have a cybersecurity privacy law practice separate from my university job, so I am compelled to say, no one's hired me, I'm not giving you legal advice, you can't follow it and blame me for it. However,
Wait, I get $10
rejected. However, in my opinion, the single most important thing you can do at your businesses and in your personal cybersecurity is wherever you can, email, etc., enable multi-factor authentication. Most of your banks you've already seen have forced you to do that. I know Microsoft Office 365 has the capability to do that. My law firm, because of my profile, is constantly and massively targeted by lots of bad actors.
Yeah, I'm sorry about that.
Yeah, so I need some help with my bill too. So one of the things we require is all of our attorneys and staff not only enable multi-factor authentication on their business email, but in their personal email as well. And literally 6 days ago, one of my attorneys gets a text message on her phone from her personal email account saying, here's the code you requested to reset your password. Except guess what? She didn't request the code to reset her password. And there's only one thing that means. That means somebody, whether it was from the Yahoo breach or many of the other breaches, has her password. So not only is multi-factor authentication a great security device, it's a great alert device as well. Second thing I want to say is just to back up something that David said. This concept of risk assessment is present in almost every regulatory regime there is, under the new GDPR in Europe, which I'm sure some of you are dealing with, under healthcare, under HIPAA, etc. And it seems like it may be a waste of time, but just going through the exercise of mapping out what the most important information to your business is and what the most important processes are, and doing that with security professionals, hopefully internally, but if not, externally, doesn't just help you comply with regulations, but it also creates a great other benefit to your company, which is it's basically a business continuity analysis. You're teaching yourselves what are the vulnerable parts of your company, what information you can live with, what information you can live without, and that pays off dividends not only in cybersecurity, but lots of other ways.
Thank you. Brian W., from your perspective, when should a private company that has experienced the cyber attack contact the government, and what should they expect?
Well, one thing too that I get a lot to add on to that is, why should somebody contact law enforcement? Now, some people in here, it's well, of course I would. I'm a patriot. I want to be able to contact law enforcement either for my own assistance or because I feel like that's what I should do. Other people have, kind of more almost a modern litigation mindset. Maybe if they've been through litigation in the past, or they have that worry that what's going to become exposed if I contact the government? What are the negative things that happen? And starting off with why, there's sort of the selfish internal reason why. First, we can share information with you, particularly when you look at it from the bigger picture. Very likely the person that has attacked you has attacked other businesses. We might already be investigating that. There might be other indicators of compromise, IP addresses, domains that infected devices are calling out to, that we will be able to share with you. We're not going to be able to tell you where they came from as far as what the other victim was, and we would do the same for your company, not telling somebody that you were victimized and that this information came from you. But it could be information that might be able to help you identify a backdoor that's installed or another point of infection. So there is a selfish reason. It's not sort of the old one-way street with the government where you hand us information and nothing comes back. I will acknowledge the fact that it may not be the same number of lanes on each side of the street. I get sometimes where people say, well, what's going on with my case? And you got to think of it, when you get to the U.S. Attorney's Office and somebody being charged, it's going to be the United States versus this particular subject. So you got to think kind of bigger picture there. For the good of the rest of the companies, the benefit of sharing information with us helps us identify there has been another victim. Maybe the FBI or the government should be putting more resources on this investigation. Maybe it's information now that can be shared with other businesses, potentially in a bit more of a proactive manner. Maybe somebody hasn't been infected, but we can see who they're targeting, and as a result, we've had this on lists before where we see a number of domains that they have listed somewhere that they're targeting, and they just haven't made it to the bottom of the list. We might be able to get to you faster than the attacker does to sort of thwart an attack. Getting to the when as soon as possible, and I'll make this, from my perspective, you'll see we don't get an IP address from you that has attacked you, or a domain, or if we see something on your system, get a subpoena or a search warrant and immediately catch the bad guy at that point. Very often there is multiple layers. It could be they're using a VPN, they're using another infected system, and we have to collect information not only nationwide, but potentially internationally, to where we're collecting information from the UK, and then from there we see the bad guy used a German server, so we're grabbing that. There may be an email address from another country.
Go back. You need an Edison microphone.
So there's multiple layers, and what happens is different companies and different countries have different retention periods that they put in place. We have a huge movement towards privacy, which is let's keep fewer records. There's a benefit on the privacy side if there's fewer records being kept. Of course, if you're trying to track anything down, not as good of a benefit if we're trying to track the bad guy or attack the bad guy and ultimately bring them into custody. So that's where the sooner the better. So the legal process is sort of meant to move at a certain pace and not be any faster than it can be. And of course, the legal world moves a little slower than what the technology can do. So that's why I would say you want to move as fast as you can. One thing I did want to note here, kind of humorously, as we move into the IoT world, it's additional challenges it poses for us when it comes to approaching a business and collecting this evidence. There's certain new technologies and how you're going to collect this, and I kind of laugh at the thought that are we going to actually be carrying off a refrigerator or an oven during a search warrant and have to bring that back to the lab for processing. I hope not. I hope it can all be done on site, but it's additional challenges these kind of things pose.
Those physicals are going to get a lot tougher.
They are. Yeah. So, absolutely.
All right, so if we could, Bryan, see if you could maybe bring this together and sort of talk about the individual company's cybersecurity challenges and opportunity, and how this rolls up to more of a national economic and policy and security issue for the country.
So it goes back a little bit to what I said before about Dunkirk. In an age where really our government, for some of the reasons Bryan mentioned and for some of the reasons I mentioned, can't protect you, but you, American companies, are the target of other governments in other countries. And I was just an expert witness 2 weeks ago in a case in Vancouver involving the Sony attack by North Korea in 2014. This is no joke, and they're not only targeting big companies like Sony, they're targeting everyone. So we're kind of in this weird space, which you almost have to go back to the early 19th century to find an analog where 90% of the critical infrastructure of the country is owned by the private sector, but it's very difficult or impossible for the government to protect it. So we have to protect it ourselves. And what does that involve? Bryan already mentioned one of the most important things, which is be willing to be in touch with law enforcement, local and state and federal law enforcement. And as a former CIA officer, I have a certain view of the FBI generally, but they've changed a lot in the last few years. And if you manage the relationship correctly, it really is possible to get their help in a major breach and also not expose all your secrets to litigation, but you have to be very careful how you handle it. The other thing I would say about that is get to know people like Bryan before the crisis. You don't want to have to be cold calling Orange County Sheriff's Department or the FBI in the middle of a crisis. Pushing it up to the national level, I think there are a few things that companies can do. One is, what I just mentioned, create relationships with law enforcement. Secondly, create relationships with other companies, not other countries, but other companies. There's a lot of mythology out there about sharing information on cyber threats within an industry. For a long time, there was a myth that you were going to get prosecuted for antitrust violations. In my opinion, that was never legally possible, but it really wasn't until towards the end of the Obama administration, the Justice Department and the Security Exchange Commission came out with a public statement that said, we will not prosecute you as long as you're not sharing, pricing information, as long as you're really doing cybersecurity. There are a lot of groups now and mechanisms to share information between other companies in your industry. If you have one, you should join that. And the last thing is, really as I think voters and citizens, and I know there are a few government officials in the room, we really have to start putting pressure, I think, on our state and national governments to come up with and enact new laws and I hate this word, but new paradigms for doing security. We have to stop being so afraid of the contact between the government and individual companies and promote mechanisms where everybody can feel safe and secure in sharing information, because with all the new data analytics, and we're doing a bunch of work on this at UCI, if you get a critical mass of information about cybersecurity threats being looked at by the same researchers, you really can make a lot of progress. But if it's all stovepiped in individual companies, that really handicaps us.
Thank you. All right, well, I'm sure you've gotten a lot of insight and information, but some of that might have caused you to ask or think of a question. So this is the moment in the program where I would love to open it up to those brave souls, or a brave soul who would like to be first, and ask one of the three panelists, or all of them, a question. Who is the first one that wants to ask the question to the panel? In the back of the room, at table 7, please stand up. Say your name, please, and state your question.
Sarah Katz. I'm just wondering how you all feel about the password apps or whatever, and they say, put all your passwords in here. Do you guys put your passwords in those password apps?
Okay, before we answer that question, give her a round of applause for being brave. That is awesome. Thank you, Sarah. Who would like to go first?
I'll go first.
All right, we'll go down the line.
I only put David's passwords in. I was very skeptical of Passkeeper and these kind of apps for a really long time, and I still am to some extent. And I actually don't do it. I use passphrases, so combinations of letters and numbers and symbols that make, in my mind, trigger a sentence, but it wouldn't in a bad guy's mind. But there's two different ways of engineering those password keeping systems. One is on your hard drive. It keeps the file on the hard drive of your computer. That is incredibly dangerous, because basically now what you're doing is you're giving an easy target to the bad guys. By the way, in the North Korea Sony hack, and this is public information, they compromised 25,000 passwords that were in a file, unencrypted, called passwords. So all they had to do is translate from Korean to English, and they had it. Now, on the other hand, so they can work if you keep them on a hard drive, but you have to have a very strong password. You got to make sure that password isn't anywhere that they can get it. Much better, I think, if you're going to use them, are the ones that store your file in the cloud, so that it cannot be found on your hard drive because it doesn't exist on your hard drive. Now, again, though, that just circles you back to you have to make sure that your username and password with the cloud storage are very strong and very secure, and you don't make them guessable. They're not your kid's birthday or street you used to live on or anything like that. And you don't make a record of them anywhere. So I'm count me as less skeptical than I used to be. But if you're going to do it in the cloud.
One thing I'll add to that is you have sort of that wonderful continuum where it's absolute security on one side and you're really running a lot of risks on the other side. You got to kind of determine where you want to be on that continuum. Do you want to have easy, quick access to a number of these passwords and not have to try to remember all of them? You don't have to be resetting them all the time because you forgot them. You'll decide where you need to be on that. Obviously, memorizing every single one of them, nobody knows any of these things, is the best. But I don't know anybody in here that could actually say they got that down pat for every one of them and are not using the same one over and over again, or the wonderful, I'll use Ravens #2. Nobody will guess that. And we have seen it before with our, when we were using informants. It's one of the things that the FBI does. We have seen people actually do an active attack where somebody had changed their password and changed, like as you see users will do, they'll keep as much of it the same as possible and then change 1 or 2 digits on there. That's very, very common. We saw them make an attempt, okay, Ravens #1, Ravens #2, until they finally got the right one. They could tell because they saw what the clear text password was and they assumed what a human is going to do, because that's of course our biggest weakness. So the password keepers, are they an added risk? They're worse than memorizing everything, but the reality is, a lot of websites, the passphrase is a great idea, but you'll see some won't even let you create the most secure password. They will restrict you from using what you want, or restrict the length or the number of special characters. And so it's hard to remember each one, especially sites that you're not going to use all the time. Maybe things like, your 401k password, or the bank where you keep most of your stuff. There's times where if you don't need to access that all the time, maybe that one can be somewhere else, or you don't have to keep that in somebody's keeper. There are modifications that you can do, but the reality is, how is it going to let you actually live your life at the same time? And you got to determine what levels of security are you willing to give up for some level of convenience.
So I'll answer Sarah's question. Thank you for the question. No, I do not use any of those tools, and for the reasons that Bryan and Bryan outlined. For me, what I do, and this is kind of a tip I offer to folks when they meet somebody at a cocktail party or otherwise, they ask, so tell me what I need to do to be secure. I like to I rate the passwords that I have for various websites or otherwise in 1 of 3 buckets. There's the very secure bucket. That's something that is of the utmost importance, where I need to have a password that's not written down somewhere. I memorize it. It's very strong. Then there's that medium grade bucket, where it's something that these are tools that are somewhat important, but the password does not need to be as strong for whatever variety of reasons, or if something happens to this particular website, my access to it, it's not the end of the world. And then there's the everything else bucket, where I have one standard password that I use for all of them that I'm sure is out there and has been breached dozens of times between all of the various breaches. But this is for all the various websites that require you to set up a password, where I don't care if you get into my LA Times account. I'm not a subscriber. I am a subscriber to the wonderful OC Registers. Thank you very much. Of course, that's a very secure password, right? No, but so my LA Times account, for example, you need to have that account in order to use the password, in order to use the website. But if someone gets in there, I don't really care. It doesn't do anything. And so there's not a reason for me to have that added inconvenience, that added stress of having to remember yet another password, of thinking of a different way of protecting that. So what I've done there is I've assessed the cyber risk, and I've rated it as a lower risk, and therefore I'm not going to put as much time or effort into that particular risk. That being said, that for the reasons that Bryan C. outlined, it's not a bad idea for certain websites and certain tools to be utilizing that password, but it doesn't give us the automatic out that it would seem like of, oh, okay, I get to overcome this hurdle by simply putting everything into this one tool, and then I only have one password I ever have to worry about remembering, because inevitably, if you're that willing to drop down and lower your security profile, you're probably going to write it on a Post-it note somewhere, or in several places, to make sure that you remember it, and then you have the same security issues you were going to have otherwise.
I'm Owen Holmes, president of the forum, and so I had this conversation with Bryan. He knew it was coming because I said I would get to it. The ZTE situation, I wanted to talk about it because it has implications on national security. intervention by a foreign government, all this kind of stuff, and everything going back and forth. So I wanted your perspective. I don't know if anybody else wants to know, but I do.
Thank you, Mr. President. What we're talking about, in case you haven't seen the headlines, is there's a Chinese company called ZTE which makes, I don't think they actually make the actual phone, but they make a lot of components to phones. And the U.S. intelligence community came out with a public statement about a month ago, maybe less, saying these phones and the Huawei phones in China are very susceptible to espionage. Not only government-to-government espionage, traditional spying, but also to stealing intellectual property. And one of our former directors of national intelligence has said that the largest transfer of wealth in human history has happened from the United States to China in the last 10 years. It's not quite as easy as an issue as it seems, because you're not going to stop ZTE-enabled phones from getting into the United States. Even if we somehow ban them, which we probably can't under our Constitution, it will be very difficult to enforce them coming across the border. So, first of all, I would never use one. I would never buy one. Same thing with Huawei. What I tell my clients is if you're doing business in China, you are compromised. You cannot have a physical presence in the PRC without being compromised. And if you have a phone or a component that's built there, probably some of you don't even know you have components, that they're at risk. However, if we try to engineer the destruction of a company like that, 10 other ones are going to come up behind them, and we're not going to know what they're doing for a long period of time. So in a way, what the government seems to be stumbling into, and by that, without making a political comment, I mean the president, is possibly an elegant thing, right? What he suggested is, we don't put them out of business, but we require them to source most of their parts and all their key components in the United States. So now, if they can pull that off, and I'm not suggesting it's a well-planned strategy, because I don't think there's much strategic planning going on in Washington now, but if they can pull that off, it might actually wind up we're better protected than we would be by putting them out of business. So it's really complicated, but just as a consumer tip, if you go to the PRC, you will be surveilled. And I would take clean devices, I wouldn't use them when I come back, or better yet, don't communicate at all while you're there.
So I'd like to thank the panel for the time that they gave today. And to thank the members of the OC Forum for graciously having this conversation, and obviously for all of you who took time out of your busy schedules to be here, and for the 5 of you that were brave enough to ask questions, thank you for participating in today's event. I'm going to turn the podium back over to our President, Owen.
Thank you all. Let's give a big hand to Richard for doing a great job as moderator today. Great questions.
Support of the Orange County Register and our sustaining partners. For more information about the Orange County Forum, call 949-588-9884. The Orange County Forum is a nonprofit organization. Your contributions are tax deductible.